in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And for those of you who are new to us, Read Theater is an online theater and education consulting company whose goal is to inspire educators and theater makers to use theater as a tool for community engagement and healing. And every month we offer different masterclasses, brainstorms, and wellness spaces that are all on a pay what you decide model. And that's in order to ensure equitable access to education. So if everyone's ready, we're gonna get started. And I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen. Actually, yes, we're already. All right. Sorry. First time, so we're going to be reading some notes. And as you already know, you signed up for our February Brainstorm, which is tips and tools for re-envisioning process versus product with Powell's Max, who you'll get to know in just a second. And throughout the school year, we are examining how we can create more sustainable and impactful theater programs. We are currently answering the question, how do we create opportunities that inspire reflection and investigation? There we go. Yeah. All right, and as you, okay. And the objective of this brainstorm is to specifically explore how we can create more opportunities for investigation and reflection in our work by re-envisioning process versus product. And this is just an outline of what we're going to be doing today. All right. As we go throughout the conversation, I just want you to keep in mind these questions. What is currently working in your personal practice? Where is there room for growth in your personal practice? And how are you being fulfilled as an artist through the work you create? And this is especially important because if you are not excited by the work you're creating, you will get burnt out and disillusioned. Take it from me, I've been there. So we got to keep staying excited about what we're doing. And, oh, sorry, skipped ahead too much. Okay, and I'm really excited to introduce you to today's collaborator, Powell Max. Powell is a director, producer, and educator currently based in New York City. Select directing credits include The Concert for America at the Fifth Avenue Theater, Gutenberg the Musical, The Drowsy Chaperone, the 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee, Urinetown, The Musical of Musicals, The Musical, Richard III, and A Midsummer Night's Dream. He has directed world premiere plays, operas, and musicals, and he has his directing MFA from the New School for Drama in New York City. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite Powell's. So take it away.
Okay, well, good morning, everybody. Thanks so much for having me here. And it's really a pleasure to kind of meet and see all of you. I actually see some friends here, which is really great. So this is exciting. So let's just jump in. So when Lindsay asked me to talk about process versus product, I was like, well, of course, like I know what I think about that. Like I know for myself that if you focus on having a good process, that will always lead to a better product. And that's going to kind of be our guiding principle for today, is focusing on your process, which will then lead to a better product. But then I thought to myself like, okay, but what does that actually mean? Like, how do I actually do that in my process? And so it caused me to kind of stop and reflect on what I've learned, especially in the last 3 years. And I think it's also like important to acknowledge in this moment that I'm still learning. But I'm going to share kind of some thoughts and observations that I've had over the last part of my directing career. And then hopefully we can all kind of talk about it and see what other people think and figure this out as a group. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen and doing a little presentation. So I'm going to start that. Share screen. Perfect. Okay. So process versus product. And as I've said, I believe that focusing on your process will always create a better product. And so the other thing that I really want for us to think about today, or that I believe to be true, is that when I talk about these things, I want to be clear that there's like no rules to making theater. I believe that there's only principles. I think that's true when it comes to directing as well. I don't think there's like one right way to direct a play. I think that everyone kind of finds their own process. And don't get me wrong, I think there are really good principles that you can have in your craft and in your process. But I would never tell like another director, it has to be this way, because every group is different. And so as I'm speaking about my experiences, kind of as Sean said, I think it'd be great if you were thinking about like, oh, like how could I incorporate this into my process? Okay, so the first one I want to talk about is warming up the room. And warming up the room means taking the time each day to bring all your collaborators together and orienting them in the same direction. And this one is actually really, really important to me because I will hold my hand up high and say, I have not always been good at this as a director. In fact, I would say, like, to critique myself, this has been something that I have sometimes struggled with, in the sense that, I can remember certain times when we'd have like a 90-minute rehearsal and I'd be so focused on like, we only have 90 minutes, we got to get going, that I would just like do a quick warm up and then we jump in. And I would never actually talk about like, oh, like, what are we here for today? Why are we like, what is our objective for the day? And, I want to get everybody on the same page and inspired to be in the room. And so like, for me, this is like a really perfect illustration of prioritizing your process versus your product. Because if you're so focused on, we got to get to the end of the day, we got to accomplish objectives, we got to get this done so we can get the show up, that can often lead to a less effective rehearsal than if you actually take the time to really have an effective warm up, to bring everybody into the room. And I've seen some of my colleagues do this beautifully. So this is something that I've kind of learned I really need to incorporate in my practice, and that I have been actively working on. So hopefully you're kind of feeling warmed up as we kind of talk to you about like why we're here today, and that you should be thinking hopefully about like how you could incorporate this in your practice, or you could make suggestions to the group about how you might tackle this particular problem. And so the other thing I want to talk to you about this is the difference between warming up the room the first day versus every day. And so my mentor, John Doyle, he told me once that the very first day of rehearsal is the most important day of rehearsal, because in that first day, you have to get everybody in the room basically inspired. You have to inspire them as to, why are we doing this play? If you're doing a Midsummer Night's Dream, why are we doing a Midsummer Night's Dream in 2021? Why are we doing, if you're doing Hello Dolly, why are you doing Hello Dolly? Other than like, you can love Hello Dolly, but hopefully there should be a reason that you're doing the production today. Like, why is it relevant? And for some pieces, that might be really, really obvious. But basically, as a director or educator, it's kind of your job to get everybody into the room and like on board about like what we're trying to accomplish. And if, for example, your focus on a piece changes mid-process, like for example, the last production I directed was this production of Richard III that was originally going to be performed live on stage, and then midway through, because of the coronavirus, had to be converted into a Zoom production. It was a huge challenge bringing everybody into the room and trying to be like, okay, we're going to do this on Zoom. You can't see what it looks like, but I promise it's going to be good. That was tough, but it's really, really, really important. So, and I remember, after John said that, I like went to his first production. He was directing a production of the Scottish play Macbeth at a classic stage company. And I wrote down like every single word that he spoke the first day of rehearsal. Like, what does that really mean to get people inspired by the play? And, one thing that he talked about was, his personal connection to the play. And John is like Scottish. And so like the play really resonates with him. So that can actually be one way if you're like, well, how do I inspire people about this play? Like I can be like, oh, I think we should do it today for these reasons. But another thing that you could always talk about is like, well, how did you find yourself choosing this play? Like, why did you want to do it? And even talking about that, I think that's something we take for granted. that's not always obvious, like why we chose to do the play. And I spent a lot of time talking to people about why I chose to do Richard III. So like, setting the tone, getting people inspired for the first day is important. But then every single day, taking the time to talk about like why we're here. And then also, I think it's really important, especially today, to check in with your actors about how the actors are feeling today. Because how the actors are feeling today will help you respond as a director and make the best choices in the room. And then the last thing I want to talk about, I put a little note to myself, is some directors have like 20 warm-ups in their like bag of tricks they do to like really engage their students. That's not always been me. But one thing that I found to be effective is like actually empowering students to lead warm-ups, because that way they can do a warm-up that they really, really like. You don't have to think of one. But also what's really great is it gives a student like a leadership responsibility. And it shows that you have confidence in the students and their ability to collaborate with each other. So like, I would just say like, I was supposed to direct a production of Newsies this summer and last summer. It keeps getting postponed. And I remember watching a director I really admired work with the same group. And this was a high school group. And every single day, she brought amazing warm-ups. She's also an improv artist. So she like plays lots of improv games and got the room really fired up. And when you're working with high schoolers for like an 8-hour rehearsal day, I think bringing them into the room, getting a high energy warm up, and then talking to them about what our objective for the day was really amazing. And so like, that's something I know for myself, that when I eventually step into the Newsies room, I'm going to need to have those 20 warm-ups that I can do. Or like, for example, if you're a high school educator, it's Friday afternoon, you have 2 minutes to knock out a rehearsal. Your students just had an algebra test and their brains are totally fried. How are you going to bring them into the room? And so I think, playing games, or each director has their own method of warming up the room. But I think it's a really, really important to take that time. So, I mean, that's kind of my first one I want to talk about. But before we keep moving forward, are there any questions or like comments about this before I'll stop sharing my screen for a second before we move forward. And if not, it's no big deal. We can keep going and circle back towards the end.
Yeah, and if you do have any comments while Pals is presenting, just drop them in the chat section, and at our next break, I'll make sure that we address them. Does that work for you, Pals?
That's great. Well, I'm going to share my screen again, and I'm going to keep going. Okay. So the next one I want to talk about is always try it if you can. And what this means to me is when you have an actor or another collaborator that wants to try making a new choice, if it's at all possible, you absolutely should give them the space to try it. Like you absolutely should. Like, and where this can be really, really obvious is with actors. If actors are like, hey, like I know you wanted me to do this thing, but I really, really feel like I should do this thing, you absolutely should give them the space to try that. I have found personally that when I give actors the space to make contributions in that way, it very often creates something that's much better than what I could have thought of myself. And I've definitely walked into a room. Like for example, I remember like directing 25th annual Putnam County Spelling Bee and walking into a room and be like, I'm not sure how this number is going to go. And it's a very terrifying feeling. But, if the collaborators feel empowered to help you make the choices, often when you work together, you'll create something better than what you could have tried on your own. And that goes, I would just put a note to myself. So this comes from a directing text that I read in undergrad from William Ball, I think it's called On Directing. And there's a lot of things that I actually don't love about that book. And I actually would not recommend that book these days. But to pick out one thing that I do love about this book is this piece of advice. And the other things that William Ball says is this can actually, and this I think is important, is it can take multiple times for it to actually work. Like sometimes an actor will be like, well, actually test you. and they'll give you a choice that like is not a good one. And they'll be like, well, let's see if they're actually going to try it. You know, you do. And this is the other important thing about it, is that when someone tries something and you don't like it, you should be able to explain why. You can't just be like, oh, I didn't like it. You should be like, oh, that's so interesting that you tried that. But like dramaturgically, this is why I think we're going to make this choice. Or like, oh, that's great that you tried that, but the pacing gets slowed down a little too much. And the actor will go, oh, interesting. But what William Ball suggests is that by like the third time, an actor will give you like a golden choice that you never would have thought of on your own. And this has truly saved me a lot. To give like a very, very specific example, when I was directing Richard III, there's a scene that happens in the Tower of London. You know, basically like one of the characters is murdered by two murderers. And how do you, you know, kill someone, you know, on stage when you're not in the same room, like when you're on Zoom? Like, how is that going to work? And you know, the actors in the room, one of the actors in particular said, well, what happens if we just turn the lights off in our apartments? And suddenly, when everyone turned their lights off, you know, you suddenly could believe that they were all in the same space, right? Because we had no like feeling that they were in separate areas, and that was an actor generated idea. And so you know, it ended up being probably one of my favorite scenes in the whole play, and that was definitely not mine. But the good thing is that like I hope that I played a part in the actor feeling like able to share that choice, right? To able to share that idea. And then the other thing I would just want to throw out there is like, this goes for designers as well. You know, if a designer comes to you with a new idea, even if you've kind of gone further down the process, you know, like if you should take the time to listen to everyone and incorporate it or try it if you can. You know, going back to Newsies, I have one more quote here, which, you know, I kind of fall in love with every show that I'm working on currently. But I thought that this quote from Newsies is kind of like a little directing mantra that really relates to this. You know, this is from Catherine, and she's telling like Jack, the lead character, that what it is to be like a leader. And she says, being the boss doesn't mean you have all the answers, just the brains to recognize the right one when you hear it. And right, and like I remember, like especially when I was first starting out as a director, feeling so nervous and so it was my obligation to always be the one in the room to have the answer, to know what to do. And what I'm here to tell you is that's actually not true. I think it is important for a director, if nobody has anything, I think it's really important for the director to be able to try something, because that can then lead to another idea. I don't think you get to say like, no, we're done. I can't think of it today. You got to think of something to try. But it's more, for me at least, again, I would never tell another director like how to direct. But for me, it's been more about like recognizing the best idea in the room, which isn't necessarily always mine. All right, I'm gonna stop sharing there. If are there any questions or comments we wanted to talk about? Yeah, I think it is. I see that you post. I think it's called A Sense of Direction.
Yeah, I will drop a post to that book. I actually read that book too, and a long time ago, but I think it rubbed me the wrong way because as a dramaturg, I think he says that in that book that a director should always be their own dramaturg, and I don't know.
Well, the other thing, as long as we're talking about why that book is bad,
is not saying it's bad, but
is not good or not useful anymore, is that in the like he gives examples of using action language for like I attack my opponent, or I interrogate my friend, or I seduce my lover. You know, he's trying to do this thing to get us used to using action terminology when for talking about like how to talk with actors. And looking back at those examples, I think I haven't looked at them for a while. I think they're like incredibly sexist, truthfully, or even it's been a while, but like definitely problematic. 10 out of 10 would not recommend. But that one piece that I was able to pull out, and I find that with a lot of directors, I don't agree with a lot of their methods, but I'll pull out one piece of something that they do, and that works for me.
Yeah, very, very much agree with that, because I feel like when I first started out directing, I read a lot of Uta Hagen and just like the different methods, and like now I'm very much like let's just pick what works out of everyone and like make the Sean method or the Powell's method, and yeah.
Right. And I think that's honestly what creates the best work,
Mm-hmm.
right? Is when you can see a director's style and personality in their work. That's the most exciting, because uh, we were talking about Hello Dolly before we started this class, but like, what's going to set your Hello Dolly apart? Like, why are we doing Hello Dolly right now? And if you can't really like, if you can't answer, I was actually talking about this with a director I really admire yesterday. If you can't answer, like, first off, I believe you have to answer, why are we doing it now? But if you can't answer that, and you also can't answer, okay, what's going to be unique about my production, at least if you can't even answer that, then I would say maybe you shouldn't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but that's Hal's opinion, right? So
Mm-hmm. And from what I'm hearing, pals, the answer, because that's what's popular or that's what the kids want to do, isn't good enough. Or I don't want to say good enough, but that shouldn't be the go-to reason.
I think, again, Pals thinks,
Mm-hmm.
I think that if there's like a show that's popular, let's talk about a show that I love dearly, that I get judged a lot for loving. I love the show Be More Chill. Um, uh, but I have gotten, especially in grad school by my faculty, got severely judged for loving that show. And so, but like, I think, be like, well, why do I love Be More Chill? Like, I love the score, it's popular, but I think then it's your job to interrogate the piece more fully. What is really at the core of Be More Chill? And like, for me, I'm not directing Be More Chill, but I would start with the fact that like, oh my gosh, like Jeremy just desperately wants to fit in, and he's willing to do anything. And going back to high school, I remember like how high my emotions were in high school, and I would have done like anything to like talk to my crush, right? And like that for me is where you start to get at like the source of the story. Like, what would you start asking questions like, what would you do to be popular? Like, really, like putting yourself back in the day, if assuming you weren't popular like me, like what would you have done? And once you start asking questions like that can help you get to the core of a piece. So there's nothing wrong, I think, with choosing something that's popular, but I think it's your job to understand, well, why is it popular?
Mm-hmm.
Like, why are we still doing Richard III, for
Mm-hmm.
example? um and
Disney,
for
the
me,
Disney catalog,
what's that?
the Disney catalog.
Yeah. Like, what are, like, why are we still doing these things? Should we be doing in fact, I think it's really important right now, really important, that we really interrogate like what pieces we're doing and like why we're doing them, because I think there's been lots of problematic season selection that's happened in the past. That was partially like the conversation I was having with my one of my directing mentors yesterday. Like, and so, one thing that we were talking about was like, I think it's important for the director to, stay true to their vision, but I also think it's important to like examine like, okay, but like, why are we doing this? Who is this serving? So hope that makes sense.
Definitely. Anybody else have any thoughts?
That's fine. I'll keep going to my last one, and I'm just gonna go out and say like, this one's actually does not belong to me. Like, I tried William Ball earlier, but this is not mine. But it's something that I've encountered recently that has kind of changed my world a little bit. So let me share my screen. All right. So this last one is called Speaking in Drafts. I'm going to credit this to Miss J. O'Leary. And Miss J is an artist from Seattle. And she's kind of been facilitating, she's been facilitating discussions with Village Theater Kid Stage, which is one of the organizations I work with. That's where I was going to direct Newsies. And, over the last year, the entire theater industry has been very rightly like reevaluating itself and reevaluating its practices. And, I think there's a lot of artists who would say the theater definitely can't go back the way things were. I'll raise my hand there, but rather that the theater needs to come forward in terms of like battling a lot of its problematic practices and its ingrained white supremacy. Um, and so, but what Miss J thinks and I really connect with is that partly how we're going to solve that problem is realizing that what someone says like like today or is only a draft of themselves, or what someone says in rehearsal one day is only a draft of themselves, and like we're all working towards being a better final version of ourselves. And so creating like a really safe space where people can mess up or like as long as you sense a good intent and like an ability to work on oneself and change for the better, then creating that safe space and realizing that that's not the final version of them is very, very important. And I'll just talk about this kind of how it connects to me personally is looking back at my directing career and things that I've said, there's some things that like I did not say correctly or said things that I've said that were problematic, and so like I spent a lot of my time, after I say something, like reevaluating it and being like, oh, like I really should have said it this way. Like, and try to get like, this is a little tricky to talk about because sometimes it can seem very like kind of generalized. So I'm gonna try to be like very specific. So, if I were to say, like, oh, like kind of going back to our last discussion about like show selection and, like, oh, I don't think we should do that show because I just don't see how it creates meaningful like opportunities for actors of color. If you said that, you could say that in kind of two ways. You could say like, oh, like, and I've been guilty of saying something like this when I didn't really mean it this way, but I've said something like, I think it would be like in this moment, like career suicide to do a show that doesn't actually like address the issues that are happening in our country in the theater right now. And when I say something like that, immediately goes ding. That seems like very self-serving, right? That seems like very like, oh, he's focused on his career. And what it actually I think should be actually about like, oh, but no, this actually doesn't do anything to help our community. This doesn't actually serve any artistic purpose. One is about myself, one and the other is about like, what is this art piece doing? But so like creating a space where it's like, oh, he said this, and I know like I sense positive intent. That's he must not have meant that, or like he needs to be told that like that wasn't the right thing to say. And then creating a space where like a person can come back the next day and be like, you know what, you were right, but I'm going to change and be better today. And creating that space for like for yourself and for your students, I think is really, really important. And I'm thinking like I'm speaking say from like if I was directing a show like in an educational institution and a student said something problematic, I think it's important to like tell that student like, okay, you can't say that, this is why it's problematic, but also not penalize them in a way that like, oh, like they're not going to be like welcome into the space, or penalize them that way. Creating a space where they can grow, because really, especially as educators, what we're trying to do, we're just trying to help everybody grow and become better versions of themselves. And so I'm going to also like hold my hand up right now and be like, I'm saying this as like a white man, right? Very privileged white man. And like my thinking about this might not be fully evolved. It might not be like where it needs to be completely. But I can tell you that it has advanced a long way from like 1 year ago. So yeah, I just creating that space for yourself as well, that you're just a draft of yourself who's always trying to be better, is really important, I think. But that again is where I'm at with that in this moment. So stop my share, because that's kind of the last big one.
All right. So I just dropped a couple links into the chat section. I believe it was Diana who just mentioned the idea that we need some updated text to reference. And I recommend these 3 books. you have Staging Sex by Chelsea Pace. Yes, obviously, like that's going to be for more professional, and like I really hope you're not working on stuff with lots of intimacy for high school students. But there's a lot of really great resources in that book to talk about teaching students about their bodily autonomy, but also just really great consent practices. Even if it isn't like a scene where two actors have to like make out or kiss or something. It's a great, even if it's just like, it's really a great resource when you're working with actors where any kind of touch is required. I definitely recommend that book. I also have in there Black Acting Methods, which is a new book written by Dr. Sherelle Luckett with some contributions with a number of great Black theater artists and thinkers, including a mentor of mine, Dr. Kashi Johnson. It's really rethinking the whole the white European acting model that we've kind of accepted as being the norm. And I also yes, the book is over 15 years old, but I do think the Viewpoints book still has a lot to teach us these days. So those are 3 books if you are looking for some texts that you think to kind of just like update your thinking and to bring some more process oriented work into your classroom. But yeah, so pals, should we open up to questions?
Well, I just wanted to I did have one thing related to what you just said,
yes.
Which is, and don't get me wrong, like I think it's really fantastic to have texts and to like really do careful work with your syllabus and make sure that your syllabus is inclusive. But like, I also think it's really important to invite artists of color into your classroom, and pay them to come in your classroom. You can't just be like, hey, can you come in? Like, for example, I found myself this summer teaching a class on writing 10-minute plays. But I was like, but I want more voices in here, especially because number one, I'm a director. So I was like, I want a playwright to come into this class. So I was able to, invite my colleague Ruth Chang, and they were able to come into the class. And that was something that I asked.
I love Ruth's writing. Sorry.
She's fantastic. Or they're fantastic, right? Yeah. And so like it had been like I've known Ruth for like many years, but that was something I actually had to ask Village for to make sure that they could be with us in that class.
Amazing. And yeah, if you have like any specific need and you're looking for like a specific teaching artist, I'm sure between pals, myself and Lindsay, we could definitely connect you to the right people, and they'd be happy to give you their rates. And
right, like for example, in terms of intimacy, like intimacy is something that in this moment, like I would never tackle on my own. In fact, Re Theater does a really great series with Chessa Betancourt. And I remember taking lots and lots of notes about like, oh, what can you do? For example, we talked about touching, like there are lots of options, especially with high school students, to get, to do an intimate scene without actually touching, and like Chessa provided a really fantastic list of options. What you can do, you can just like stare forward, approach the scene that way with 2 people facing forward and not actually touching. You can use lighting. You can use really like intimate eye contact to communicate the same things. But that's something where I would be like, oh, I'm not actually the authority on that, but I have the ability to point towards someone who is the authority on that.
Amazing. I just dropped in the. I'm sorry, Rita. I just dropped in the chat section. There's a replay from was it the October Brainstorm? So there's a replay in there, and that was all about the just giving out resources for diversifying content. So if you'd like to go back and check on that.
Okay.
I just dropped that link in the chat there. All right. What do
I
you
don't know.
say,
I would
Paul?
be curious, like absolutely open up to questions.
Mhm.
But like for me, I've worked primarily like in the last 3 years with like graduate school age, actors. So I've worked less. I've done a lot of work with high school actors, but less so. Or I've done work with adult actors. But as I said at the beginning of this like presentation that I did, you know, every situation is different. Um, you know, uh, I might not do zip zap zop with grad school actors to get them warmed up, right? So like I don't know if there's any specific, like I'm curious how others might apply these principles into their work, or like um, I know that like, or they could think of like a really good example that they could share from their work um, about how they incorporate this into their practice. Because for example, I've learned from watching other directors that I admire, like how important like a warm-up is. I had like I have actually a colleague from my grad school here, and one of the things that I observed, hi Nigel, one of the things that I observed by watching their process was just how amazing their warm-ups were and how that brought everyone into the room. And so that was something that I have incorporated into my practice by watching someone else. So if anybody wants to share, like, or have questions, I think we should open it up.
Yeah, and I would also, I don't know about you, pals, but I'm also curious to hear what everyone's working on and whether they're, if you're, are you working in person with your students? Are you online? Are you doing a hybrid? Where's everybody at right now, too? And also, what brought you here? Don't make me call them people. No. Nigel.
Hi. Hi, pals. I
Hi,
love
Nigel.
pals. Pals is one of my favorite people. So I wanted to pop in today. I was like, oh my God, Pals is giving a workshop. Um, I am, in terms of the warm up question that Pals brought in, um, I've had a chance to be able to sit on like all of our directors programs rehearsals. It's just as in the nature of the education process, we have to sit and watch people's rehearsals. And I've always found it like really exciting to see what folks are doing at the top of their rehearsals, depending on the show. When the three of us were doing our adaptations for Shakespeare in our second year, it was like we first of all chose very, very different plays. And so while Pals is doing Midsummer and I am downstairs doing Titus, our warm-ups and how we get into the space are going to be very, very different. And so I find that one of the first things that I at least ask myself when I start going into the planning of a process is really, what does the show call for? And what do the actors and the performers need, and what does the team need prior to going into the room? Whereas for some shows we can do an action-based or physical warm-up, and it's like great, we're excited. But then some shows that have a deeper meaning or more serious meaning really call for some time for actors to kind of be able to sit with their own thoughts. And so that was something that I've learned from the countless shows that that myself, Pals, and our other directing colleague did through our 3 years there. Was each show required a different warm-up, required a different set of rules and governance of how we were going to move into the space. It was very exciting to see, especially when we were working on 2 or 3 different shows at the same time, that I would leave rehearsals for Titus after we just bloodied up the room to then move into a room where we were working as dogs and wolves, and how that was so different. Also played by Ruth, who I adore. So yeah, and I'm currently working with undergraduates, and that's we are in person, so that's exciting and scary all at the same time. And working on directing a showcase for the first year students at the university, and so that's going to be super exciting. But I was happy to pop into this because having a great process now is very different versus in person versus online versus a hybrid. So this was great and exciting to be a part of.
And what university are you at again, Nigel?
Long Island University.
Gotcha.
Well, and I just to compliment something that like Nigel said, because they're absolutely right, is tailoring the warm up to the show is really important. Like for example, when I was directing Spelling Bee, there's actually the person who played Rona Lisa Peretti also happened to work at like a preschool. And so she would lead all of the actors in basically like the preschool warm-ups they do before they do class every day, right? Which would be completely inappropriate for Titus Andronicus, or Titus Andronicus versus Midsummer are two very different processes. Um, uh, Nigel, if it's cool, can I talk about Mentimeter for a second?
Oh yeah, go ahead.
So, Nigel's thesis at the new school was a production of Spell Number 7 by Intozake Shange. And, at that time, Nigel was using this program called Mentimeter, which essentially what that means is that like, it's a program where like the actors and the other people in the room, they can like text in like how they're feeling today. And then like it compiles like kind of a big spreadsheet, a big like document that kind of shows everybody how everybody in the room is feeling. And like everyone, as far as I know, Nigel, everyone who was working on your process absolutely loved it. And we talked about how effective that was for that show. And then once we started working on Richard III, I really wanted to incorporate that into my process for that show. And for whatever reason, working digitally online, we used it for about 2 weeks. And at the end of each week, because it was such a crazy situation, we were trying to figure out how long can we rehearse, like how do we rehearse on Zoom? We actually got some feedback from the cast that the Mentimeter, especially the fact that like we kind of read off how everybody was feeling, was making people feel very uncomfortable. So what we started doing was we started allowing folks to send in their Mentimeter, but only like I and the stage managers could see it, because that way I could still see in the room like, oh my gosh, the cast is feeling especially vulnerable today, especially unfocused. And so something that worked really, really well for Spell Number 7, perhaps it was that group of actors, perhaps it was the fact that it was on Zoom. It just was not clicking in that certain way for Richard III until we made that adjustment. So each group is different, right? And for high school, you might, I don't know if you want to incorporate that into your process. I don't know if you want to have phones in your rehearsal. So like it's up to each, I think, director and individual to be like, what is the best way to bring this group together? And I think to agree with what Nigel just said is thinking about each group as their own like unique process, each show as its own unique process. And that I have found creates really fantastic results. Anybody else?
Yeah.
I really love what everybody's saying. My name is Fran, and I'm a director, producer based in Omaha, Nebraska. And as much as I would love to work in the academic world, and I have my MFA and all of that right now, I work in the theater for young audiences arena and with youth and doing things outside of the school day, as well as with professional actors. And right now we're doing most of these things on Zoom. The TYA stuff, professional stuff is on the main stage doing a hybrid, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's a beautiful thing because, especially talking on the professional side, sometimes we forget, at least in the spaces that I've worked in for 25 plus years, especially with new work, we feel the pressure, there's not time, come in and do your own sort of warm up. And then everybody's sort of, frantically trying to get the new thing going on. And I think it's just really great to sort of ground oneself in the warm up. I'm an actor and a director who identifies as someone with a physical disability. And when I cast artists with disabilities in my work and try to promote that, I also try to find ways to allow them, the artists with disabilities, to approach the warm up that is in a way that they can authentically engage with it. Meaning if they have to do something, if they're on crutches and it's something that they use their arms, that we allow them to be on their knees. Mm-hmm. And then having others, even if they don't engage with crutches, being allowed to do that too, and to see how it feels and be free around that. But I've been thinking a lot about, and then I'll be quiet, how we can take what you all do so beautifully in the academic world, because I think in the professional world, some of that is lacking. We just sort of, it sort of goes out the window. And how can we bridge that coming from the graduate programs into the professional world? And how can we make sure that that isn't lost in the wave of what I call the tyranny of the title and the hamster wheel that is the creation of the work?
Well, Fran, can I just ask a clarifying question?
Sure.
Are you more saying like, is it due to like a lack of time, or more is it just like the culture just isn't allowing it right now?
I think it is the both. I think the time is, this is pre-COVID. I'm thinking of a process that shall not be named, that it was so tight. It was in this non-equity, but this 3-week window, and the culture in the institution didn't allow that. And I've been thinking a lot in this time of COVID, like, what can I do and what can we do to sort of, you know, break down the culture so that we can make freer processes, understanding that there's going to be constraints on anything. Richard III has to open, you know, in 6 weeks. It's like, you know, there is a drop dead date, but how can we make sure that that'll happen? And then I'm going to be quiet because I've shared the space. I'm talking long enough.
I personally think that's a really fantastic question. And, you know, it's kind of funny because I feel like I'm drawing on our grad school examples of Titus and Midsummer so much right now. But, you know, Nigel and I found ourselves in a position where we had to do these adaptations of Shakespeare, but, you know, we had class 2 times a week, and it's a 2-hour class, or like 2.5-hour class. The first hour and a half were taken up with monologues. You know, because they were working with the instructors, and like the actors were working with their monologues, or they're doing scene work, right? And so then, like, after an hour to an hour and a half of like watching the actors work, then we would get like 1 hour to rehearse the play, like, you know, 1 hour. And so I think that's a moment where, as a director, like, I started to get like kind of what you're describing, like, are we going to get this done? How's this going to happen? You know, like, I don't have time to do a warm up. And I remember very, very, very distinctly my directing professor coming and kind of lighting me up and like, are you going to get this done? Is this ever going to get done? And so what I would offer, because, you know, I wasn't there, I wasn't in your process, is creating the space for warm up. You know, hopefully as a director, you'll be empowered, you'll have time to do that. But I would also say, for me, the most important thing is, if you can't do like a physical warm up that you're describing, you know, is even taking a moment at the start of rehearsal to bring everybody together and to like check in with how everybody's doing. And actually, this is interesting because it's different on Zoom than it is in real life, right? This is actually something that I picked up from Lindsay, working with high schoolers. She said, you know, just, can everyone show me on like their hand, you know, on a scale of 1 to 5 how they're doing? And even like, you know, if someone says, if you can see like some people are at 2s, or sometimes they're at 4s or 5s. If the whole room's at 4 or 5, you can approach the room in a different way than if you see like 1s and 2s, and you're like, oh, okay, I should, like, you know, as long as we get through this rehearsal and we still like accomplish our goal, but still, like, at that moment, for me, the most important thing is to take care of those who are in the room, right? And so even creating that space is something that has not been in my experience, especially in professional rooms. So I think if you can, you should. And as a director, it's time for things to change. And I think you should insist on that. I personally do. But even directors who are a little bit more old school. So my mentor, let's say John Doyle, who, you know, if you don't know who John is, John directed this production of Sweeney Todd that's very famous, where everyone plays their own instruments. And he won the Tony Award, and he did Color Purple, and he won the Tony Award. But John will even, like, he'll take a moment just to bring everybody into the room and not even ask like how people are doing. He'll say that sometimes, or maybe he'll be talking to actors individually before rehearsal starts, but he'll always take the moment to be like, okay, here's what we're doing today. Here's what we're trying to accomplish. And even taking that moment is so important, because even if you're saying, okay, we're doing Act 2, Scene 1, why are we doing Act 2, Scene 1? Like, what's the point of doing Act 2, Scene 1? What are we trying to accomplish with it? Are we just messing around with it? Because if you give the actors something to work on, they can work on something. But yeah, I think even taking that moment to get everybody on the same page is really, really important. And it's not always done, even in the professional world. I don't know if that answers your question at all. Those are my thoughts.
Beautiful, thank you.
Anyone else feel like sharing?
I've been
Yep.
directing, oh, I'm sorry, Christina, I think you had
It's
your hand
okay.
up a while ago, so I'll let
I
you,
did.
I'll let
Okay,
you go
thank you.
first.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. I'll be quick because a lot of the stuff that I wanted to say was already said. But Fran, I wanted to thank you for bringing up what you brought up because I certainly run into that issue as well. I'm Before COVID times, I was a teaching artist, and all of my work sort of dried up after a certain point because nobody wants to sit their kid in front of a computer for a super long time. So I'm reevaluating my teaching artist life. But I've also like been a freelance director. I'm an artistic director, and I've really tried to sort of merge the way I handle my classroom with how I handle my rehearsal in a professional way, and just like, you know, creating that safe space and having like the check-ins and such. I'm a huge fan of roses and thorns. So like the one good thing you know about your day and like the one not so good thing about your day. I do that in a sort of professional setting. But what I wanted to say was I did run into that issue of wanting to kind of like languish in the process while still knowing that I have a deadline of like an opening night. And sort of the, I guess, backlash that I got from the people that I was working with, and it might just have been the group that I was working with, but I was wondering like, how do I make sure that that doesn't happen again? Because like I want to like keep creating the safe spaces, keep the checking in, keep like the group warm-ups and the this and the everything, but then like meeting the deadlines that I need to meet to put on a show, so it's not like we're rehearsing this thing forever and ever and ever. Because like when I was in grad school, my professor of mine told us, he was like, a thing is never done. He also told us to never be happy with what we're doing until opening night, and then let opening night be opening night and just be done with it. But he was like, you could rehearse this thing forever. And like, that's not really the point of what we're doing. I'm like going off, but I have struggled with that as well. Like, how do I meet the deadlines? How do I make things safe where everybody can feel that they can say what they need to say and check in and everything. So, but it might be an issue of tearing down the old structures and trying to rebuild it, which is all great and amazing. I love that, but it's also very hard. It's like, how do you rebuild these structures in your own way? I don't know. I can ramble about that forever, but it's just it's kind of nice also to hear that other people are having the same issues. So yeah.
I guess like I don't really have like an answer to like the question of like, how do we fix this, right? But like I can just also just share another personal anecdote that may be helpful, maybe not, but I hope it is. So when we were working on Richard III on Zoom, all of a sudden, you know, initially what we would do is we do, you know, 2.5 hours, and then, you know, we take like a 30-minute break, and then we do 2.5 hours. And what we ended up finding was, by the way, to all those who have to leave, thank you for being here today. But we found was after about 2 hours on Zoom, the actors, and they expressed this to us, the actors just could not handle it anymore. And so, you know, to relinquish, that was like the big fear I had. It was like, we're doing Richard III, like, how can we give up a full hour of rehearsal every single day? But then what we ultimately found was that the 2 hours that we had the actors were more productive because they were able to focus for those 2. So, you know, that's another, it's like, you know, it's a constant game. And, you know, I think another thing that you said that I'd love to pull out is I do think it is time to start like tearing down old structures. To use another anecdote about, so this is like completely different. So I work with a company called New York Theater Barn, which is all about focused on new musicals, right? And you know, one of the things I do for them is I read all their like submissions, their open submissions, right? And so many shows that I read are all trying to be under like 8 characters because there's so much pressure to have a small cast when you're like a new musical, right? Because it's got to be producible, it's got to be producible. But if you're doing a period piece, you know, that or you're doing a piece that would like involve like several, for example, bodies of different nationalities, you actually can't double like, I'm to use a specific like anecdote. You can't like double a person of color from like, let's say the Southern Hemisphere or let's talk like South America and like Asia. You can't do that anymore. Like that's not okay. So we're starting to wake up that like, oh, I think as an industry, we need to stop focusing on like, let's keep our cast small. Let's actually cast the people who should be in these roles. And like, as a director, I would fight for like, I don't care about doubling and keeping the cast small. If the show needs this person, it needs this person. And I think we need to start, me personally, I think we need to start, really prioritizing, authenticity over time. That's like a very epic rant. And I know like sometimes you have to get your show up, right? The other thing that I do personally is I keep like a little calendar of like, goalposts that I want to hit in the process. And, that way I know that like, oh, okay, I'm this far off or I'm this close. And that's also helpful for me to like know how it helps me be reassured that we're still on track, or helps me figure out how we can make up the time if we need to make up the time. I don't know if that's useful to you, but just to also commiserate, like I totally know where you're coming from. It's really hard.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. And just, I know like as an artistic director, I'm trying to do less or like have my season do less so we can spend more focused time to create the one little thing and have that be great. Instead of like a million things where everybody's rushing and feelings get hurt and like things happen, and which is a whole other issue.
I mean, and this kind of gets into like a larger conversation about, say, the American theater model, United States theater model versus like European theater or, regional theater. Like if you have to produce a 6-show season every single season, like at what point are you just producing because you have to produce? Like, or say like in Europe, they're always like, oh, the pieces are so good because we can take 3 months to really perfect it. And I do believe there's truth to that. I've seen some really amazing work, on the US stage, don't get me wrong. But, I was talking with Linda Chapman the other day, and she was talking about how the most important thing that she sees in work is when like an artist can fully be with that work and take the time it needs to develop for it to be good. So if you're producing a show every single season, what if it really took 2 years to create the process that you really need? Or like I don't know how long John took for his Sweeney Todd. It was the first production that Sweeney that Sean ever saw. But like that was through like many, many iterations of that show before it finally got to where it needed to be. So there's all sorts of things, especially in the US, that are, for me, like an impediment to making really good art. Good arts definitely still happens, but I don't know. I feel like, as we said kind of earlier, I think it's time we don't want to come back to what we were doing before when we come back from this pandemic. I think we should hopefully come forward as an industry. And I'm not like, I'm just one small person who's like playing my part as best I can. There's plenty of people who will talk authentically about like their experience, because I've had a pretty privileged experience in the theater, right? But it's also I think it's my duty as an artist to like listen to those folks and also create space for those folks where space has not been created before.
I agree with everything that you've said so far. It's been really interesting. I do all of those things, but I don't have to worry about being in a teaching environment because I'm working in community theater in Canada. Mostly. I work in community theater in the Turks and Caicos as well. But I often give the adults that I'm working with them the responsibility for a lot of things as well that I wouldn't necessarily do with kids. So things that I don't want to remember, I tell them to remember, which works really, really well because it gives them something to focus on other than just their own part. And it also gives them a feeling of being more involved and being more important, which they still need. Doesn't matter how old they are, they still need that. What I found anyway. Yeah, I really like the stuff about welcoming the room. The room has to be warmed up, absolutely. And I've learned a lot about warm-ups from a lot of different directors as well from watching them. And I like to do 2-handers and 4-handers. Those are really easy right now. But we're not doing anything at the moment because we can't get on stage.
Yeah.
In Canada. So I don't know. We're just doing the Zoom thing. Most of that is just script reading.
And Amy, you wanted to share something too.
Well, yeah, I have been similar to Christina. I'm a kind of former teaching artist that's not really a teaching artist anymore, which moved me kind of back into the directing performing world, which is actually like a really great gift of COVID. But we're doing, I've started a theater company that's doing, developmental readings of plays, to kind of help the playwright and inform their work. And I guess my question is, we have that time pressure that you've been talking about, and you've also got that interesting or odd thing that happens on Zoom, right, where you've got a room of muted people because everyone wants to cut out the background noise. So, what are some more ways that you feel like you can open that space under that time pressure, I guess, is the question.
And you're talking about Zoom specifically?
Or, I mean, even, when I do get back in the classroom, the projects I'm directing, we usually have even less than an hour, 45 minutes. And for me, it's younger students, like middle school, or sometimes younger. So even then, half the thing is a focus thing, right? So it's like, how can I keep that space? And then also, how can I give them that space and allow them to take place in the process without letting that time pressure kind of take over the process?
I mean, I'm thinking very specifically about developmental readings, which is like a great example of like a time pressure. And in fact, in that particular circumstance, the time pressure can be really good, especially if you're like doing like a music stand reading, because it can force you to make decisions, because it's not, again, like that's not the final draft of the show, right? It's like it's just specifically intended to not be the final draft. And so I think, like, for example, I'm going to kind of guess that you're doing like table work on the reading as you're doing it. Yeah. And like, I think it's really important to ask for other people's thoughts. Oh my gosh, I should have talked about this earlier. This is something that John Doyle does all the time that I have not always incorporated into my process. And I've always, not always, I have often been very open to, like other people's thoughts in the rooms. I don't like to speak in absolute statements. But one thing that John will do is he'll just ask people for their thoughts in the room. He'll be like, okay, so today we're going to do, this scene from the Scottish play, and I think it's about this. Thoughts? What do you think? And, like, he's very open to, like, he's like, oh, that's interesting. Or, and I'm actually now I'm thinking about Shakespeare specifically. Shakespeare, like, especially, like, there's so many times where I've been like, oh, I assumed this line meant this. And the actor says, no, but I thought it meant this. And I was like, oh, well, I'm worrying about every character in the play. This actor is approaching it as one actor for one role. So they probably thought through like what this means in greater detail than I have. And so often I'm like, well, why do you say that? And I have been very often convinced that their interpretation of the line is actually the one that we're going to go for. But I've also been in a position where I've been like, oh, but actually, I think it really is this because of this. And you have to be able to say why. But I think just inviting people to offer their thoughts and when an actor offers a suggestion, to really openly and honestly try it. I know this kind of goes back to my presentation. Yeah. And I know it seems like so, in a way, it seems like so easy, but it's often so hard. And I guess the other asterisk I would put on that is there are moments where you absolutely actually can't try it. Like if you're in tech and an actor like wants to restage something and it's going to change the entire lighting scheme, you can't try it. But you have to say to them, I love that you had that idea, but this is why we can't do it, right? But I guess just trying to be open to anybody's ideas in the room at any time, or even stage managers. Like, I've had stage managers who's like, hey, I was wondering if you might try this staging idea. And like, I tried it and it was like really great. So, I also think there can also be like sometimes fear about like trying things in the room, or like letting actors try things too much. Because I think sometimes it can feel like I'm not the director. And that's probably a tension I felt a lot, is like, if like most of the ideas come from the actors, did I actually direct this play? And that goes back to my quote from Newsies, about sometimes being a director is not about always having the best idea. It's, for me at least, it's about being able to recognize the right idea in the room, or even just creating an environment where those ideas can be shared. And I don't think you can take for granted how important it is to create that environment. And actually, it can be something that can be difficult.
Right. I totally resonate with what you're saying. As somebody who identifies as someone with a disability, and I walk with crutches, I don't know very many directors with disabilities working in the educational or professional world. And when I adopted the principles that you don't have to know everything as a director, that quote really resonated with me. But I have gotten pushback from artistic directors that I have to come in and be the general, which is not my nature in collaboration. And every time I've done that, it hasn't come off well, because they all look like a bunch of me's walking around up there. And I still get that pushback. I don't know if there's ableism in it. That's a whole other conversation. We don't need to unpack that today. I can unpack that with my therapist, blah, blah, blah. But it's like there is that model that still lives in this world. And I will fight it till my dying day, I'm sure, which is why I want to be an artistic director, because then I can not espouse something else. But I don't know if anybody else has had that feeling.
I'll share an anecdote with you that basically saved my life in grad school. I'm actually not sure I've ever told Nigel this. And I guess the other thing I want to say is that I'm an able-bodied person. So like in terms of your personal experience, like that's very, very difficult. And that's something that like I am, very unfamiliar with. So I'm sure that's as you're engaging with that issue, it's very difficult. But so I talked about John Doyle a lot, because he really did kind of save my life in grad school. But John at one point told me that there's two kinds of directors. There's a lion director, Lion, like a lion, and there's lamb directors. And by that he means that there's like, the lion is someone who's going to like take charge of the room, and be like, you have to be the general a bit, and don't get me wrong, like, and then the other, sorry, well, let me talk about the lamb. And the lamb is like someone who's much more like about like, what are we doing in the room? What can we as a group accomplish? And this is John's take, and I personally agree with him, is that both are right, I actually think, and so, I mean, obviously there are like toxic practices that happen in rooms, right? And that's not okay. But there are people who have more, lion-esque tendencies, or more general-esque tendencies. And I do believe that there is a way to approach that work, and it can create some really amazing work if it's done, with respecting everybody in the room. I just happen to know that for myself, that I just happen to be like a collaborative artist who's much more interested in hearing what everybody in the room has to say. And that's partially from like my undergraduate directing training. And I think I was kind of instructed in that way. So it just was part of my like directing lineage and heritage, right? So it's tricky. And I know that John identifies as like a lamb director, and I'd hold my hand up to be like a lamb director. But I have like a lot of respect for like lions, I think some of my directing faculty at school were lion directors. but still, don't get me wrong, they're still open to what people are saying, but they're just more on the side of like, I'm going to take charge of this room. And so I think that's something that I think what's important is that you figure out what works for you, you know? And it sounds to me that like there's something in you that kind of rebels against being a line director, for example, or like being the general in the room. And yet I'll just tell you right now that like I've seen some generals create some really amazing work. And sometimes the actors in the room love that. Sometimes the actors in the room love a strong hand because they can feel themselves being pushed and growing as they're working from like a very strong-handed director. Whereas, and this is another thing, just to talk about my process, sometimes it can be scarier for an actor to work with a lamb director because they're like, oh, like, it feels good that I'm contributing, but am I growing as a performer in this moment? Or like, because I want to grow, I want to get something out of this experience. So, you know, all this to say that like, and you know, to have like lion and lamb is more misleading, right? It's more like I would say like a spectrum of like different styles. But I guess I would just offer to you that it sounds to me like you have a strong sense of like what resonates with you and how you like to work. And I think that's the most important thing. Because I spent probably, I would say the first 1.5 to 2 years of grad school trying to change how I worked. And it was only once I kind of got over that and I started talking with like someone who was in a completely different wavelength as a director from like my faculty, who are brilliant directors, and I like admire them with everything that I am. It was only once I started seeing like another way of working and being like, oh, this feels right to me, that I felt like I started doing, honestly, like good work. So.
Amazing. I don't want to bring this conversation to a halt, but if you don't mind, I just need to do a couple housekeeping things because I know people might have to roll out. I'm okay sticking around to chat a little bit more, but let me just do a couple housekeeping things.
Well, can I just quickly say, I just want to say thank you for everyone to their contributions today, because you know, hearing what other directors are going through, you know, hearing because it's such a crazy time. Like just taking a moment to acknowledge that we're all directors during a pandemic, which is an incredibly challenging time to be a director. Like, thank you for taking the time to be here today and have this dialogue.
Yes, thank you so much, everyone. Just give me 1 second. Okay.
Sean, while
Yes.
does anybody have any questions or anything they wanted to add while we're getting our tech housekeeping notes set up?
Okay, cool. I'm just going to share my screen again real quick. All right. I'm sorry. Here we go. All right. So later this month, just a couple of things that we got going on. This Wednesday, we'll host our Theater Makers Wellness Space, which is hosted by drama therapist Ashley Martinez. Ashley joins us each month to provide educators and theater makers an opportunity to work on their mental wellness. I've been a part of a number of these wellness support spaces. They're really fantastic. And Ashley is just really creative, find some really creative ways to get us to like talk about where we are. Like I think last time I was there, we were talking about if our life today was a show, what would it be? And I mean, to go back to Hello Dolly, I talked about how my life is Hello Dolly, it feels like sometimes. So yeah, definitely come and check that out. Also at the end of the month, I'll be moderating this again, but we got another special brainstorm for next Saturday. It's about COVID-19 protocols for outdoor performance. This is more for producers than for educators, but Rob Klimowski will be joining us to share his research and protocols he's developed for the state of New Jersey, which can easily be applied in your community. And Rob joined us last September to discuss this topic and has since continued to update his resources. So this is going to be a pretty important and useful conversation for anybody that wants to think about doing outdoor performances this spring. And just to talk about for next month, we got next month, the theme is going to be redefining community representation, and we're going to be joined by two incredible guests. First up, we got Rick Eddinger, who will host a masterclass on Thursday, February 4th. Rick is an associate teaching professor of music theater at Carnegie Mellon University and the co-chair at Carnegie Mellon School of Drama's Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Committee. He's going to be joining us to discuss how to create space for community feedback and evaluation based on his work. Our Brainstorm collaborator, so this event, but next month, is going to be with who somebody Powell brought up, Francesca Betancourt. And Francesca is going to talk to us about fostering trauma-informed, brave, and creative spaces for everyone. And more information for this is available on the website if you want to sign up for that. And if you enjoyed today's brainstorm, we have past brainstorms available for free. Just go to the website and check them out. Here's here's a few of the, I'm pointing to my screen, but you can't see me pointing at my screen. These are the different topics and the different people that we've worked with before in Brainstorm. So definitely check that out if you can. And finally, here is all of the information you need to know about Re-Theater. There's the Instagram at re.theater, theater with an R-E. There's the Facebook at :theater with an R-E. And then of course the website and the podcast Flipped in the Script, which is a fantastic podcast. If you have a chance, I definitely recommend listening to that. And of course, if you want to reach out there, you can reach out to Lindsay at retheaterco.com. All of that information. All right. I'm going to stop sharing. And actually, pals, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
So it's okay. Obviously, when you're working at the level of John Doyle and you're working on a classic piece, you can have Mr. Sondheim in the room to consult with and work on, bounce ideas off of and talk about potential rewriting. But in terms of,
that's totally true. He can have Stephen Sondheim in the room, literally.
Yes, but so I'm more thinking of like the times that I've worked with students, especially in high school, where we were talking about where we were like, I was really trying to get them to take ownership over their parts and have them really experiment and play with the work. But I also had a lot of students who took that as meaning, well, then if a line doesn't work for me, I can just say it however I want. So how do you deal with both the emphasis on the process and the experimenting and the playing with the text, but also being true to the author's words?
That's a great question. I mean, first of all, like, I think it's important to like lay, for me, this is because I haven't actually come across this issue for a while, because like in Shakespeare, I just adapted it to change it how we wanted to do it, right? And I'm a big believer that like, I don't believe in like doing Shakespeare correctly. I actually like, I've had lots of conversations with people. It's like, oh, you need to do Shakespeare correctly is actually code for like, you need to do it in the way that I, was taught how to do it, which is how it's been taught. And I know it and you don't. So I'm better than you, right? But like a piece like Stephen Sondheim, you actually can't change the words. Like it's legally, you can't do that. But
yeah, I was more referring to like the modern, like the current stuff that's still protected under copyright and everything. And yeah, because I know like directors are like, let's just take out all the stage directions and all that kind of stuff. So,
I actually think that like the most important thing is to make sure that they take ownership. But if like they want to change the line, I would interrogate that time. I would take the time. It's kind of goes back to like, if you can try it, I'd be like, well, you can't do it in that way. And I'm speaking in a very general sense. but why did you want to say it in that way? Like, what is it about the line that triggers that response in you or creates that response in you, right? And the actor would say something to me, and I'd be like, okay, well, can you redirect that intention into the line that actually exists? But I would be like, sorry, you can't actually just change the text. If I'm understanding your question correctly.
Yeah, I was just more like, yeah, I've worked with students before that just like, well, yes, I'm going to learn these lines, but I will put them in my own words, kind of thing. And yeah.
I mean, like you're not going to get like, I don't think MTI is going to come get you if you like paraphrase something, but
that's very true. But it's also, I do, especially when I was working, and maybe it's just like as a dramaturg, like new play fanatic, I do try and like really like put in my students' heads like playwrights can't unionize and they don't get the collective bargain, so instead of like being able to get health insurance, they have complete control over their work. Right. So
I mean, I guess another thing I might offer to you, and I don't know if you could offer like, I know we have like 3 minutes left. Actually would be very curious to continue this conversation with you, but to ask like, well, why do you think the playwright wrote that line in that way? And it's so hard because like on a case-by-case basis, if a student was like, well, like I actually can't say these words, I'd be like, oh, it's hard to speak in generalities with this, but that's I guess what I would say to you is I would like interrogate like both like why the student wants to say it in this way, and then ask them if they thought about like why the playwright wrote it in this way. Oh, let me think. I did just think of one thing. So this is going way back to when I directed 25th Annual Putnam County Spelling Bee. And like that's definitely a very comedic play where like adults are playing children, right? And but very often like there was a certain style and world of the play that we had established, and especially in previews I could see certain actors were like trying things that might get a laugh or like were really big choices, but I was like, oh, but that just doesn't feel like it's in our world of the play. It doesn't feel like you're a child anymore. So I had to have a talk with the actors and be like, okay, so like what is the world of the play? Like, does that choice actually fit? And I think having that conversation about like the rules or given circumstances that we've established and be like, you can work within those given circumstances. There's a world of choices within there, but you do have to stay within those. I hope that's helpful. I don't know if it is.
No, it definitely does make sense. It's, I think I was just more like kind of being like, I've just worked with those students who like, when I say make the play your own, they take it as, well, then I can just throw out the script and just make it say what I want to say.
Well, then I guess the one thing that I would offer then, this is a great conversation, actually. It's very intriguing. Make the words your own, as opposed to make the play your own. Because you make the play your own, you can say whatever you want.
Right.
But how can you make the words your own? And actually going back to like Shakespeare, that's been one of the hardest challenges because none of us speak in iambic pentameter exactly. I mean, iambic pentameter is actually very close to our speech patterns today. But how exactly do you make those words your own? And a lot of it is just the actor has not gone deep enough with their investigation of the text. Like why they're saying it, how does that connect to them? Like, we're out of time, but it's like, if you're saying this, if you're professing your love to someone and they're rejecting you, like, and you say something back to them, like, when have you been rejected in your life? Investigating that safely, like, how does that connect to you? Make the words your own as opposed to making the play your own.
Awesome.
I have a question quick. Sean, you said that you can't change stage directions. I'd never heard that.
It's tricky. Because of course you're also asking, like, depending on what the script is, like, is it the stage directions that the playwright wrote, or is it the stage directions from like the stage manager taking the notes? I was more talking about like, I've met a lot of directors that are just like, I will just erase every single stage direction and then just figure it out to play my own and everything.
That's actually, just to quickly jump in, that's actually a John Doyle technique as well.
Really?
There's a very famous anecdote, where he was working on Roadshow, which is the last piece that Stephen Sondheim and John Weinman wrote. and they needed like a workshop production, and they had not had much success. And so they met with John, and John was like, well, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take out all the stage productions, stage directions, I should say. And like what they found was that in the writing, it was really slowing down the piece. And like, you just couldn't get any momentum. And once we just started like going boom, 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 boom. And this is kind of a John Doyle thing where there's like no set, and you're just like moving from thing to thing to thing to thing to thing without really any transitions. Like suddenly the piece started to live, and suddenly they started realizing like, oh, but this is, sometimes a writer will write something and they don't know what they're writing. And suddenly they're like, oh, when we take out all the stage directions, we're actually like writing about like an American attitude and what it is to be like, I deserve to have this American privilege or responsibility or prosperity. And so like that, I mean, you would never know it as an audience member, right? But you know, as a director, you are free to, I mean, you can't change the stage directions in the text, but you can stage the play however you want to, right? Unless the playwright has specifically said, like, you actually have to do this.
Yeah.
Or sometimes you can ask. Yeah, I mean, it's also good to ask permission if you think you should. So yeah.
And I guess so I work a lot with new playwrights who like I said, like a lot of times when you get the acting edition of scripts, like say if you get the acting edition of Streetcar Named Desire or Glass Menagerie, it's probably not Tennessee Williams stage directions. It's most likely the production stage manager notes of what the blocking is. But I work with a lot of new scripts where almost like you could tell the playwrights put as much care into the stage directions as they do into the text and everything. And I guess I always think of like an example. I saw a production of Beauty and the Beast at a high school where at the end you have the big fight, and it's actually Belle that pushes Gaston off the castle.
I've seen a version
I'm just
of that.
always curious of like, well, first of all, like, and I mean, I don't think Disney probably would have but like, yeah, it's just like, if like, because that really changes the intention. Like that changes the play in a big way.
Yeah, but is the goal of art and doing theater just to replicate?
I know. Well, that's the tricky thing.
Like, because I mean, if we're just gonna replicate, then like, I mean, that's why MTI puts out their scripts, like for high school directors, where they literally tell you everything to do for people that don't know how to direct. But like, isn't it the director's prerogative and duty to like put their own lens and purpose behind what they're directing? Now I'm just being annoying, but
no, and I completely understand. I completely agree with that. It's just, I mean, I guess what MTI, and I don't want to say, yeah, I'm just like, oh, we should be scared of MTI or whatever, but it's like, if we're trying to like make sure that like, yeah, I don't know, like with the stage directions, is that copyright protected? Is that,
you know, and that's the thing that's tricky about stage directions, and it was totally segued, which is great. No, I love this. Like for example, Stephen Sondheim writes very careful stage directions, and he says, quote, "It's the only time you get to direct your songs as the writer," right? And as a director, I guess you get to like ignore those or not ignore those. You know, I guess I would always interrogate, like, if there are stage directions, why are they there? What are they trying to do? Now, when I wasn't there, I didn't see this production of Beauty and the Beast, right? And so, like, I actually think that could be a really cool moment if Belle's the one.
Oh, it was fantastic. It was such a really great, empowering moment. But I just know how Disney can be, and like.
I mean, I think you have to be very, very careful with that because, I mean, you know, like, there are numerous examples of like licensing companies shutting down productions. Like, for example, people have changed the ending of Rent. And when they came out, like, you know, they're like, nope, and they shut down the production. And then I think, you know, it's a case-by-case basis. Another, you know, situation that's really fascinating is the end of My Fair Lady. You know, it's almost a director's obligation to like put their own unique spin on My Fair Lady because it's so ambiguous as to what actually happens. Eliza, where the devil are my slippers? You know, the most recent version that I saw at Lincoln Center is she walked right out of that room and walked out on Henry Higgins. And I thought that was a bold, bold, bold choice, you know, and I thought it was earned from like the scope of the production. It didn't feel out of the world of the play, you know, like I think there's a version of the Beauty and the Beast that you're describing where it just feels weird that Belle does that. But I also think there's a version of that play where it makes perfect sense. And I think that's also part of a director's job is to like sculpt the play moment by moment so that you earn your ending.
I think back to what you said earlier, pals, in terms of asking the question of like why do this play now? And I think that's a big, I think when, especially when working with in education, especially for younger folks in high school, middle school, and elementary, you have to ask yourself, like, in doing productions such as Beauty and the Beast, what lesson do we want to impart onto our students? And when we look at a lot of these Disney pieces, they have some really detrimental lessons, and really solidify and concrete a lot of stereotypes that Disney and all of their whatever it is that they're doing are somewhat trying to undo now, because they realize that they've actually done a lot of damage. And so, like, I mean, Beauty and the Beast is just, I mean, there's a message there that we subconsciously give to young girls, that abuse can lead to love. And what it ultimately is, regardless of any form of real love that happens between Beast and Belle, it is a relationship born from abuse. And at what point can any relationship born of abuse result in like happily ever after? And so I think when you have these twist endings that are not necessarily stage directions, unless it's like in the text and it's like a thing that is said, then I feel like, hey, as a director, you have an obligation to tell a story. And as we all know, that like theater is didactic by like nature, and that's what the Greeks originally created it for, is to impart lessons and values. And so when you put certain things on stage, you are subconsciously, whether that you are not attempting to do so, are teaching folks things that are okay and not okay. And so I think it all depends on the production. And like as Pal said in the beginning, it's a lot about like, okay, why am I doing this play now? Why am I doing Beauty and the Beast in 2021? You know, why can't we do another piece? Why can't we do our own spin or adaptation on it? Yeah.
And I wonder if it's different. I mean, Sean, you had just also pointed out that like a lot of the work that you do is on plays, which is why I'm really excited that you're now on the Re-Theater team, since I don't do anything with plays. But I wonder if musical theater is a little bit of a different beast, can potentially, because like the songs are meant to explore character, and characters are played uniquely by every single person that plays them. And so I wonder if musical theater has different things. Because I mean, I've worked on, there was a production of Rock of Ages that I worked on with high school students, the high school edition, and I had to change stage directions because I could not have the like lap dance scene.
Yeah.
Whoever did the dramaturgy for that show, like, and auditioning for high school was terrible.
If you're directing The Drowsy Chaperone, not everyone's going to be able to have a plane fly in, right? So, you know, like if you can change that, you should change it so it tells a good message, it shares a good message, right? And at the end of the day, like, you should be able to like put your name on your work and be like, I completely agree with Nigel. Like, why would you do it unless you felt good about what you were doing? I mean, so for example, like one thing, we haven't talked about this at all, Nigel, but I'm looking to start my own company in Seattle. And, but you know, I think the hardest thing that I'm dealing with right now is show selection. And that, you know, like, I was talking to someone a week or so ago, and I was like, well, you know, like in Seattle, they haven't done Merrily We Roll Along or, you know, Passion, you know, the Sondheims that aren't like the big ones, you know, and, you know, one person said to me, you know, well, they're Sondheim. Shouldn't that be enough? And another person says, well, sure, they're Sondheim, but like, what is that saying? Like, why do you do it in 2021? And if you can't answer that, you got to do the work and figure it out, you know? And they're like, really? Like, that's so true. Like, and that's just me. Like, I need to go back to the text. And it's not about choosing one show. It's about choosing like the 5 shows and like really exploring them and be like, okay, if I'm going to put my name on this, like, why am I doing it? Like, and I don't want to do something that's going to be, you know, sharing bad messages. So, I think it's really fantastic that we have the chance to, I guess, not put our own spin, but just like to create a piece that puts positivity into the world and kind of can hopefully repair some of the damage that's happened in the past.
Yeah, and Lindsay, you brought up a good point about like the whole, what you were saying with Rock of Ages. And I also know a lot of, I've know high schools that do hair, and they'll just like cut out whole numbers and everything. And then, but it comes back to the question of like, why even do those shows then? Why do we?
I
need
would
to
not do those shows at a high school.
No.
Right?
Okay,
Like,
I will say this: Rock of Ages, everybody. It was my favorite high school production I ever worked on with students because it gives you so many opportunities to talk about like toxic relationships and the idea of the friend zone, and like also like there's so much in the characters once you break them apart, because you can't just be like, no, we're in an 80s show. Love Rock of Ages for students. Nobody wants to hear that, I'm sure. But bye, Nigel. It was nice to
Bye,
meet
Nigel.
you.
I'm so glad you got to meet Nigel. This is great.
Yeah.
Hey, Pauls, would you mind, Pals, do you mind dropping Nigel's Instagram if they have a public Instagram?
I believe they do.
Great. So just because like for folks that are watching, I feel like this conversation is probably wrapping up.
Yeah, totally.
They're still being
But isn't it
watched.
great that we had more? We had like, we could keep talking. Like,
Bonus.
it would have been worse if like at an hour we would have been like,
Done.
talk everybody.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you. And we'll see you guys at future brainstorms.
Yeah. It was fantastic.